Hi, everybody. Welcome to our final week of class. Obviously, it's a very interesting time to be taking a class like this in the midst of what's going on currently, and I'm really hoping that this week we can take what has and what is happening in many cities around the country and begin to reflect on the material that we've covered and the ideas and the insight that we've gleaned as a result of reading these texts and having these discussions. And maybe we can begin to pursue a more complex way of thinking about what is occurring. In fact, I've decided to make your final discussion question address that very thing. And so the final discussion question for this week focuses on how you can begin to situate the entire phenomenon of the black bodies that have been killed and the subsequent protests and the reports of riots and violence. All of this, or any of this, you can pursue by situating it within the final chapters of White Fragility. Might as well make this reflect currency, right? It's not just theoretical. This is very much a reality of our life and our society. And so it only feels apropos to apply these ideas to a very current and real circumstance. In fact, right after this lecture, I am going to drive to Atlanta, where the protests are kicking up, and I'm going to participate and hopefully work to keep people as safe as possible. But I feel it's a duty as a citizen who has the capacity. In addition to that, we are also reading our very final play called Booty Candy by Robert O'Hara. And this play is, in many ways, super off the wall. If you've started reading it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is definitely in your face, and in your face in a really interesting way. And we read that play as a way to introduce our last major idea that is not covered in our texts, our books, but is covered in Trey Ellis's The New Black Aesthetic, a very short essay that I'm asking you to read in addition to Booty Candy as a way to kind of contextualize the play itself. It's very contemporary. The first iteration was completed in 2011, but O'Hara has made revisions to it since, I think as late as 2016. So it's definitely our most contemporary play. Well, that's not true, actually. I think Baltimore. Kristen Greenridge's Baltimore was even more recent. But it's very contemporary. And it reflects the ideas that Ellis in The New Black Aesthetic articulates, particularly around the ideas of Afro-surrealism. So I made a PowerPoint for you all that kind of covers two major movements in the arts as of late. One of them started back, conceivably in the 70s, but received a redux. And then another one is definitely more of a contemporary art movement, but both are gaining a lot of traction, primarily because they have a similarity in some respects. This idea of Afrofuturism and Afro-surrealism. We'll start with Afrofuturism, then segue into Afro-surrealism, because that's the one that I think Booty Candy is reflecting quite a bit, and we'll make sure that we understand the why O'Hara has created what he has created, which in many cases is outlandish and bombastic and explosive and any other kind of dynamic verb I can bring to the table here. But Afrofuturism is a reimagining of a future filled with the arts, sciences, and technology seen through a black lens. As we know, we have the white default, right? We've talked about that in class, and how most aesthetic determinations have been co-opted by the white lens before it ever becomes legitimized in our culture. And Afrofuturism seeks to reimagine the future only through a black lens. And it also is celebratory of black culture in general. Okay? Taking the utopic possibilities of things like science fiction and imbuing it with a black desire and pride. So we have some people that have been engaged in that. The writers, Sam Delaney and, I'm drawing a blank on her name. Octavia Butler, a great legacy. Maybe I should have notes in front of me. The origins of this Afrofuturism date back to Mark Derry's essay, Black to the Future. A couple lines he says that I think are really important to understand how this movement kind of rationalizes itself and then how it inspires Afro-Surrealism. Derry says, can a community whose past has been deliberately rubbed out and whose energies have subsequently been consumed by the search for legible traces of its history imagine possible futures? And so very much it's about history, right? And how Black America, in many cases, even if they do have some sense of knowing where their lineage lies back on the African continent or in the Caribbean, their history has been erased. And it also was not privileged in the history books. You all even talk about how, you studied history where it was all about abolition, and then it was about the civil rights movement, and that was it. And so obviously, there is so much more that has been erased because most Black folks weren't allowed to read. They weren't able to learn how to read. They weren't able to document. They certainly didn't have the capacities or privileges of education and all of the necessary factors required to document history. And so Afrofuturism kind of takes that and says, well, what can we do? Okay. It functions as a larger aesthetic mode that encompasses a diverse range of artists. I mean, they're working in different genres, media. However, they are united by this one shared interest in projecting Black futures derived from, the various Afro-diasporic experiences. We see it in Parliament Funkadelics music from the 70s, the album Mothership Connection, which you should definitely listen to because I love it. And like I said, you see it in the writers like Samuel Delaney and Octavia Butler. And they're doing this in the 70s. But Afrofuturism really takes hold during the Black Lives Matter movement quite a bit. And, just prior, the last 20 years has seen this incredible movement in Black art in particular. People like Renee Cox, and then musicians like Janelle Monáe, maybe you're familiar with her. I think of the film Black Panther very much in that guise of Afrofuturistic art. And you can see in all of those, there is a presumed pride, not a we need to have pride, but no, there is pride and there is beauty. And it is an imagination of the future. So Afro-Surrealism, which is what Booty Candy kind of situates itself more as, is in many ways inspired by Afrofuturism. It's a literary and cultural aesthetic that is inspired by mainstream surrealism in order to reflect the lived experience of people of color. Now, mainstream surrealism is all about this idea of getting into the kind of the psychic in us all. It goes back to the paintings of Dali and films by Andre Breton. But in this time and age, it is more about examining the lived experience of people of color in contemporary society and just understanding that it is already surreal. It fits none of the scope of what America was built on in the first place. So it's almost unfathomable how Black and people of color's lives are lived in America despite this. And so the very reality is what is surreal about it. This really kind of gains traction in the 2010s, beginning with D. Scott Miller's Afro-Surreal Manifesto, which he published. He's based in San Francisco, and it was published in the San Francisco Chronicle. And Miller says Afro-Surrealists use excess as the only legitimate means of subversion and hybridization as a form of disobedience. And again, it's this idea that the Afro-Surreal is actually realism that is so real, contrary to the norms of publicized Blackness, that it represents a rupture, like a radical break from ordinary understanding, such that the old feels new because, well, the old was never known. So you see what we're doing here. How can we examine a future when we don't know a past? Well, we understand that it is wholly surreal altogether. And so, while mainstream surrealism, like Dali and Breton, seek to release the creative potential of that which is of the unconscious mind, the unfathomable, the unrealistic within us, right? If you look at surrealist art, it's all like, whoa, yeah? Afro-surrealism says the lived experience of people of color is already unfathomable. All POCs who create from their actual lived experience are surrealist. So you can see it has kind of a manifesto quality. And as a result, we get some incredible, incredible art. This is the movement that I find to be the most exciting in America right now. It is distinct, it is dynamic. It has some roots in the 80s and 90s, but really gets going in the 2000s. This is where you can read Toni Morrison. You can see the art of Kehinde Wiley and Carol Walker. You can see Beyonce's performances. You can watch the show, which I highly recommend, Atlanta. You can watch the film Get Out or Sorry to Bother You. I mean, there's so much of it going on right now. And Booty Candy situates itself in that. When the lives of Black bodies is already so unfathomable that their very real lived experience is surreal. And so what we see in Booty Candy is O'Hara kind of playing with that idea, emphasizing reality in a way that feels dizzying and surreal. So enjoy the play. It is dynamic. I'd love to know your thoughts about it. And then also, after you read the last chapters in White Fragility, reflect on what's going on currently in our culture, in our society. And then on Thursday, I'll be back to more in detail clarify the final paper. Have a good week, everyone. Be safe.